welcome everybody. And this is being recorded as well. We're live, but this will be up as well on like our Vimeo and things like that. So my name's Robert. I'm an event manager at the Awareness Film Festival. And if you don't know much about the Awareness Film Festival, for those who are watching, it's a film festival all about sort of outreach and about, education, about issues, and about sort of using cinema in a way to connect people to like important topics and things like that. And all of the proceeds go to Heal One World, which is a foundation that is dedicated to bringing alternative healing, more publicly. So it's not so like a niche tool to help people as well. So, and today, this is the first panel of the festival and sort of kicking it off. And I'm excited to speak with you all today. And it's all about sort of these different perspectives of education, the culture of education, sort of the atmosphere of education, even sort of the politics and the structure of it. And I think, all of you sort of bring different perspectives to the issue as well. So I'm excited to sort of have a very well-rounded discussion about this. So, I was wondering, in the beginning, if we could all sort of go around and sort of introduce yourselves, and also why sort of the topic of education is important to you and also to your work. So if you start with Joel and Jana, that would be awesome.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jana. This is Joel.
Yeah.
We made a film called Raising Global Citizens, and education is what we do. We have two little girls, and that is basically the season of our life right now. And when we decided to travel and make our film, it was about starting the education with our kids about how connected everybody really is. So you want to continue on that?
Yeah, it was just a moment in time when we asked ourselves the question, are our children learning to respond to the events of the world through the lens of fear versus through the lens of love, based on everything that we were seeing happening in the world at the time. And so we wanted to create a vehicle, that vehicle being travel, that we thought would help them see the world through a lens of love. And that's sort of what sparked the journey for us to make the film and explore education in that way.
If you can go next.
Sure. My name is Willa Kammerer, and I directed the film Starting at Zero, Reimagining Education in America, which looks at early childhood education in particular through this lens of why it's so important for the United States in particular, but any country in the world, to really take seriously investing in early childhood education, both to create, strong citizens who are both good people and able to participate in our democracy, but also, for the economic stability and success and well-being of our country, because today's children are tomorrow's workforce. And so the film engages with a number of governors who have really prioritized early childhood education in their states, and who we see as a real vehicle, and they have a lot of power and leverage to really make high quality early childhood education much more widespread than it is today. So, and I've always been interested in education, through my personal pathway. Education is it's a great equalizer, and just the groundwork for everything else in an individual's life. And so it just is, such an important place to focus.
Mm-hmm. And Elijah as well.
Yeah, hi. My name's Elijah Reynolds. I wrote and directed the short film, What Kind of Day Has It Been?
Yeah. So I think your connection might be coming in and out as well. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Am I good? Cool.
Yeah, now you're good. Yeah. But it keeps coming sort of in and out as well. It's sort of the nature of
Great. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Apologies about that. So basically, my film was about looking at the stress of high school students' lives and the amount of pressure that is actually put on young students nowadays that as adults we often forget about, as well as just how the advancement of technology has actually increased that pressure and how colleges are just kind of bearing down on young students and how that affects mental health of young kids. So just definitely wanted to take a look at that from the student's perspective of what public education in America actually looks like, and how in media what we often see is like high school students, all they care about are their relationships and who's prom king and prom queen and stuff like that. And that's truly not always the case. If very rarely, it's actually more like, oh, do I have a good enough grade in this math class to get into this college, to do this kind of job, to have this kind of future. So yeah.
And I think, a good place to start, just because of the nature of this festival being virtual, is that sort of the virtual landscape of education has definitely changed a lot of how students experience education, but also, sort of how the media like its role in educating people and how important that is. Like, I was wondering if you could all talk about how you feel cinema as like a vehicle of education as well, being able to reach so many people with your message and being able to sort of construct a presentation to be able to teach someone is like a very sort of different method than like traditional roles of teaching and everything like that. I was wondering if you, starting with Willa as well, if you could talk about, how you see your film as a vehicle of education as well.
Sure, yeah, and we first and foremost actually created the film, not, setting out to create a feature-length documentary, but really as a tool for policymakers and for educators. And so that somewhat, goes into the format of how we produced it as well. It's been called similar to a PowerPoint presentation by some people, which is not necessarily how we see it, but we wanted it to be accessible and digestible for busy people who just really want the information that they need to make good decisions. The pandemic put a pretty interesting time in our production because we were just planning our, in-person production late April or early May and finishing production, and obviously we had to switch course with everything. But we realized that it just opened up this huge new opportunity for us to not only share the film with an audience of maybe 250 in an auditorium somewhere, but to really connect, through this with this huge virtual audience online. And so we did a virtual premiere, and have just had a real groundswell of support for the film, connecting with policymakers and educators and families all around the country. And so it's just really underlined for us the power of digital media and the online world, which just allows us to reach so many more people than we would ever otherwise.
Yeah, and Joel and Jana as well.
So with our stretches out over a few years for filming, and so I think that our message was a lot of being able to turn your own travel into education. And so it wasn't just about going to Disneyland or going camping. It was about going to places maybe you hadn't thought about going before and learning along the way. And we really encourage in our film taking a look at what your travel is now and seeing that you can spend the same amount on planned travel on an educational and new experience and still get the benefits of being together as a family and learning together as a family from it.
Yeah. And to your original question, Robert, the idea of like how can cinema play a role in it, I think that the medium of story is so digestible for children and everybody, and it provides a way to relate with content in a way that can move somebody emotionally, right? And I mean emotionally, not reactionary, because when we digest content through the media, it can be quite reactionary. And and it's obviously very driven by a certain narrative. So we had a lot of pushback from the people, like I guess sponsors or people who were involved in the project at various points. Like, why don't you just do a web series? Why don't you just do a web series? And we said, because a web series doesn't tell a story. And the hope was that through the story, families and children alike could maybe see themselves having a journey together in the same way we did. So, and thus inspire them to to try and have their own version of it. So, that's why I think cinema and story are so powerful, is because they create relatable and emotional connections to the message that you're trying to get across.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've always firmly the best way to educate people really is through storytelling. It's just human. It's what we've been doing since the beginning of millennia. It's such a beautiful way of actually expressing our humanness to other humans and putting up a mirror to ourselves. But it's always been, I've actually almost never understood when someone says like, keep politics out of film. And it's like, it's art. It's inherently going to be political. There are inherently themes in everything that you tell story with. So what are the best ways to convey those themes? How can we best get an impact out of the audience? And I feel like that's something that this festival is great for, because it's really promoting films that actually look at themes and how to convey those in the best way possible. So what I always hope to do with my storytelling personally is to start those conversations through theme and through storytelling. So yeah, I mean, it's just an incredible vehicle. That's also it's not just domestic; it's an international thing that can really transfer wherever it goes.
Yeah, and something I was thinking about when watching all of your work as well is sort of how we view intelligence in the zeitgeist. It's a buzzword, but like in the zeitgeist, in the culture, and in education, I feel like there's a very specific way to view intelligence. And I just took the GRE, so maybe that's why it's in my head as well. It's a very specific way to sort of say that you are intelligent. And Joel and Jan, I was wondering if you can start, because with your work as well, it seems like experience is so much a part of how you learn as well. And maybe that's a part of education that we don't always talk about, that there's other, forms of intelligence. There's other ways to sort of absorb knowledge and things like that. So I was wondering if you could start, with that sort of concept.
Yeah. Can I
start? I knew you were going to jump on
that.
Yeah. So really, children learn through curiosity and experience. They are innately curious. So anything that they can touch and see and experience for themselves, they're going to lock into their psyche and lock into their body, and they're going to hold on to it in a different way than being told it. And that is really what we form, or we're trying to form, education on, and what we're trying to show people is that experiences, even if you're not sure if they're really remembering everything, no matter how young they are, it locks in a different way, and you see it come out as they grow and as they experience life outside of the experiences that they've had. So we really see the continuity between what they're experiencing and how they're processing it through their future experiences. So,
yeah, that's the topic being early childhood education. The place that we are coming to, and certainly not the authority on it, is that experience is the foundation of early childhood education, not one specific aspect of education, that being like English or math or science. It is the depth of the experience that they're having and how they feel about that experience. Do they feel safe? Do they feel inspired? Do they feel like they can be themselves? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel challenged? And so for us, our vision was trying to hold the space, whether that was Vietnam or Argentina or Lebanon or the Yukon and Canada's north. How can we hold the space for there's a fly. How can we hold the space for them to feel like they can safely explore and experience this place that they're in and ask any questions that they have. and yeah, so that for us is the big driver, and letting that be the foundation for how they then go and dive into a more, I don't want to say serious, but more, I guess, specific education as they grow up.
Right. Yeah.
So to be determined. They're still young. but that was sort of part of the idea for us.
Yeah.
That answers the question.
Yeah. And Will, I'm interested.
Oh no. We lost Robert.
Our great leader. Well, I can just jump in because, there's so many.
Yeah.
I can just jump in. There's so many. We did early childhood education, coming from a, more kind of conventional, how do you do this on a, larger scale rather than kind of, family by family, but, at a school level and at a state level. But I think so many of the conclusions are so aligned, with what you're talking about. I think, this idea of experience, what we found in our conversations and research was, it's not academic learning that, young children need in order to be, well-adjusted, happy, successful, children later in schooling and as adults. It's really this learning through experience, learning through interaction with their peers, with their world, with following their curiosity and play-based learning, and just feeling, engaged and excited about, the world around them, as well as we mentioned, safe, comfortable, supported, so that they can really blossom and flourish. And so, we were looking at structurally, how do you do that, for many children. I think everything you say, these impactful early experiences is so true. And statistically, these really rich, high quality experiences where children can learn through play, that's what lays the foundation for, as you said, more specific later academic studies. So, learning the ABCs and numbers and multiply it, 4 years old does not necessarily, lay the groundwork in the same way. It's just, being able to get along with your friends and kind of curiosity about the world around you. So.
Yeah, that was, I haven't watched your film, but it was so apparent in your trailer that the joy and the curiosity that was with what you showed in the children. And that just rung so true, because, that was a playground. I don't know where it was shot, somewhere in America, but it felt like the same thing we were trying to capture elsewhere, but that's what they were experiencing, and that's what you were highlighting in those moments. So
we've been collecting sister films throughout, this process, with kind of a way aligned kind of worldviews about the, so I really look forward to watching your full while I explored your website. And I think they seem very aligned in terms of, how we need to move forward in terms of just a broader sense of education.
Yeah,
it's happening.
Yeah,
we
have.
Sorry, Robert, please.
All right, go on. Yeah, go on. Yeah,
it's timely, because I mean, these all come through the lens of, can come through the lens of your own experiences. Like our eldest daughter, Quinn, is not necessarily, how would we describe that? There are certain kids who can just fall into the track of traditional education, and it is easy for them. Our youngest daughter is that type of kid. Our eldest daughter, every experience in the school is incredibly big for her. A kid says something not nice, it's big for her. Somebody says something, a teacher says something off the cuff, it's big for her. And so she needs a different environment. And so I think that we're hearing and seeing that a lot of people are having that experience, that a lot of people are seeing that this isn't a one size fits all. It's not. It needs to be looked at an individual child level, and then, as you said, how can we figure that out en masse? Because it isn't as possible. Although the question that COVID presents us is maybe it is possible. As I think that in Canada it was like 60% of kids, or 30% of kids are now homeschooled, or at least will be for a period of time. That's a huge swing. And that is now 30% of kids having, or 40% of kids having a more individualized experience while being guided by their teachers virtually. So it's interesting to see where this all shifts in the next 12 months. Does it just revert back, or are there new questions and things being posed as a result of that?
Yeah, and as well for Elijah as well, it seems like high school is almost the best example of where experience becomes this like data-driven academic sort of knowledge as well. At least sort of, my high school experience as well was so intensely, rigorous in academia as well, that this experiential part that we're talking about sort of gets lost sometimes. And the feeling that I got from your film as well is definitely this sort of anxiety that you have to, absorb all of this and have this pressure on you. Like, how did you want to like also present that in your work, and how do you feel about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is absolutely going back to that one size fits all type of program. There's only so much customization you can really have to your own education. For myself personally, like I've never been great at math or science. Those are just not areas I excel in. I am very proud and happy of the people who do, because they benefit our lives so much. I am just not one of them. I really excelled in speech and debate and theater and choir and those types of artistic performances. And that's really where I wanted my focus to be. And, I was able to keep it there because I was in a well-funded school district. Now that's a whole other topic, property taxes. We should get rid of those. That's we should not fund schools through that. It is causing systemic racism and modern segregation, but another front. The problem is, in school, you are so encouraged to get those 4 basic pieces of academia so much, the math, science, history, and English, that nothing else feels actually important. And it is. It's so important to be able to immerse yourself in art if that's what you love. It's important to be able to immerse yourself in those extracurricular activities. If you want to be a journalist, go immerse yourself in student journalism. It makes no sense that we continue in this country to defund those programs and just try and push out the same 4 categories of human. And that's not a thing. There are not 4 categories of human. So it's absolutely essential that we decline that pressure to really excel in those only 4 areas. And we really start looking towards, how can we have more of a universal idea of, oh, we're going to have artists in this society, and they should be celebrated and encouraged to go pursue their art. We're absolutely going to have scientists. How can we encourage them the most we can, and go out and do those things? We're going to have mechanics. How do we encourage them to go out and do those things? So it has to be different than this ideology that we've kept with education for who knows the last 100 years. There's that old adage, if you went back 100 years, you would recognize 2 things, your church and your schools. And that's really sad. Like we are in such a modern society, so much has changed. Why has education not? And why do we just keep adding pressure and anxiety to the kids inside of the program right now? instead of actually using that technology to relieve stress and encourage kids to actually do something that might be different than the norm, rather than just subscribing to the absolute norm.
Totally.
If I could just,
The other, please.
I was just going to say, I mean, as you were saying, we live in, this modern technology-driven society, and, that's only the direction that we're headed. We don't know what so many of the jobs of the future are going to be. And, this form of education, we're most focused on early education, which is a really foundational period of learning, but, experiential period of learning. This teaches skills that are going to be so important for those jobs and the world that we can't predict in the future. The curiosity, the adaptability, the ability to collaborate, the soft skills of communication and empathy, all of these things, are really learned through the more experiential learning rather than academic learning, and are just going to be ever more important, for our society and for the world, that we're continuing to move towards in the jobs of that world. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, it goes beyond the four components that you mentioned as education. When we talk, and you talk about mental health, and we talk about the physical well-being of people, high school kids, children. There's this book that I hate called Why We Sleep. And the reason I hate it is because I have never felt good having a nightcap since I read it, or a glass of wine or anything like that. But as it relates to this, it's talking about how the importance of sleep, and a lot of it during a high school kid's, more than any other time, your high school time frame is when kids need to be sleeping more than the normal 8 hours, as their bodies are growing at this really accelerated rate, is the time in which they are often most sleep deprived, because they're literally going to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, between 7 and 8, and then they're studying till 10 o'clock at night. And the fact that then their minds and their bodies do not have time to rest and settle creates, or at least perpetuates, that anxiety that you're talking about, all these things, because the body, when we sleep, it digests these things, it puts these things in the places that it needs to be in our minds and physically. And if we remove that element, it doesn't do that. And so we take that anxiety into every single thing that we're doing, and it makes us less able to process the challenges that we're facing, because we're already in that fight or flight. And so even looking at it and saying, not just educationally, but the time in which we're diving into those things that we're trying to learn, does it have to be this window? Right. So
yeah, and I would even add to that the art aspect of education being neglected. Art is really how we communicate with each other. It's how humans interact and feel and relate. And when you eliminate that, you really isolate people further. So it is something that's worth promoting and continuing, and really allowing people to dive into, not saying, sorry, this isn't an option anymore. You need to be on the work line and figure out the science and the math side of things, even if it's not your calling. I would definitely say that art is as important, if not more.
Yeah. And this sort of leads into something I wanted to touch on as well, is that there seems to be this philosophy that education is very important in this country, but sometimes it seems like it's not prioritized, over other parts of government or other parts of society or culture. I was wondering how you all felt about sort of education as a concept in society, like how it's like truly viewed and how it's truly sort of fostered in this way, because we're all talking about this very like unconventional way of educating, yet education still is like very similar to how it's been for the last however many decades. Like, how do you view education? I hate using this word again, but the zeitgeist, the culture, the society, or all of that, and its place right now.
Well, I'll jump in from, for, widespread, high quality, education, whether early education or high school education, funding is so critical. And, as Elijah said, funding through property taxes is definitely probably not the most equitable and best way to do that, on a wide scale. Totally agree with that. But, without funding, it's just not possible on a societal widespread level. And yeah, I think you ask taxpayers, is education important? Is education important? They say yes, of course, education is important. The cute children, it's really important. But then when it comes down to, will you pay taxes for this? Most people don't blink an eye when asked if they feel it's important to pay taxes for defense, say. That's just considered given. Yet education is something that just always gets underfunded and deprioritized. Yet interestingly, some of the, really people who are becoming, vocal advocates for the importance of early childhood education and education in the United States are top-level defense and military people who see this as a national security threat. If citizens, aren't educated, and if also they can't pass, kind of basic skills and physical exams, early education lays the groundwork for also just, better physical health, in the future, and so many other, just positive indicators. And so it's something that we just need to begin looking at differently. The return on investment is just, I think, the number that's thrown around is, for every dollar invested in the early years comes back, 7 to 10-fold in return. And I think we just need to start really looking at it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that. And also, just in case you hear other voices or noises, I'm actually on set today. So that is what's going on. Which is also connected, is a whole thing. Anyway, I totally agree with that. And it's definitely the place where you have to be politically willing to actually step up and tell your representatives, like, it's ridiculous that we are spending 60% of a federal budget on military and security, and we are spending, I don't know, it's something like 2% of a federal budget on education. And that makes sense to them because it's actually provided from a state level. But again, that's, where we get into more inequitable situations on terms of how schools are actually funded, and creates more stress and anxiety for students based on, and parents also, like, where are we going to live to send our children to the best kind of school? And then we have things like school choice, which actually sounds great on paper, but in reality makes it even more difficult to figure out, like, oh, where am I going to live in order to get my kid to the best school that I can? How can I afford this? X, Y, and Z. So we have to demand of our representatives find a new way to fund education and to actually set up education to the best ability for our students' futures. I mean, it says a lot, I think, whenever worldwide, so many countries invest so much more within their militaries than within their education, because it's just kind of setting us up for non-peaceful interactions between countries. It's literally saying on paper, we are more concerned about what you are going to do to us physically than what we think our citizenry can do in order to be diplomatic, to actually peacefully negotiate between nations. It really is a step to world peace, in my opinion, is actually reinvesting and realigning our interests as a global community into those conversations rather into weapons and weaponry. Yeah.
That's heavy, Elijah. That's heavy. You were going to say something.
Just something that came to mind that has always been pretty shocking for me is through travel, you always see a lot of third world countries, but there's other countries out there as well that really prioritize or try to prioritize education. It seems to be their number one goal. They know if they can get the education for their kids, then their kids have the opportunity to go out and do bigger things and create peace and change their lives. And I find a lot of the time in the Western world here, it's just kind of like, well, it's available, so does it matter?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big question, because how do we change it? It's outdated. Education is outdated. We don't need the same sort of education that was created in order to put people on a conveyor belt line to create things in factories, to follow bells. We need a different system, and it seems to be not working the way that it used to. We've all changed. We've all advanced emotionally and mentally. We're noticing the importance of mental health. We need to change a lot. It needs funding, for sure.
I think speaking of, world peace and, how we've changed and, mindfulness and all this, I love seeing kind of trends, the mission of the school as well, to teaching young children mindfulness and how to manage stress and beginning these conversations early and having them learn how to meditate at a young age. I just think it's, ever more important, as our society, becomes more pressured and fast-paced with technology, just to, teach these lessons at an early age. So I'm always really happy when I see that.
Yeah, and sort of another concept as well. I was watching this crazy experimental documentary today called How to Fix the World by director Jacqueline Goss, and one of the quotes from the film is that, the film is about sort of Soviet educators going into these rural areas and teaching them literacy and how to read and how to write, and they're very resistant to it because the way they want them to think is sort of different than the way they do think. So it's this strange pull between sort of bureaucracy and sort of that way of thinking, and then just someone's way of thinking in their culture. And one quote was that education helps us understand the world more profoundly in that way, that, the way you look at your world is sort of enriched from education. I was wondering if you can all talk about that and how education can be a pathway to sort of see your surroundings in a different way, maybe in a positive way or also maybe in a negative way, these sort of gray areas of sort of understanding.
Well, I guess if I take it from the lens of the film, and we look at sort of the reason why one of the reasons why we embarked on our film and our global adventure was that there was one version of a dialogue that was being shared in the media at the time, and that was, there was sweeping nationalist movements, there was talks of building walls versus having conversations. And so if you are only seeing one side of the conversation, so we'll use that as lack of education. We'll say hearing only one viewpoint is lack of education, to your point. But then all of a sudden, these opinions are being formed, and your only real decision of interest is, does this effectively threaten my survival as a human being? If not, okay, I can step away from it. I'm not threatened. If so, it does threaten, which is often the media-driven rhetoric, because, if it bleeds, they're trying to create that sense of threat. Then now you're forming a bias against entire groups of people because of something you've learned. And I think even children who aren't comprehending necessarily the exact situations that are being presented in the media, they're still getting this understanding of bad or good. And so where travel comes into it is you get to show the other side of the equation. You get to show the humanity, the shared humanity. You get to show that we all laugh, we all cry, we all suffer, we all go through all these things. And so that representing having an education, balancing the viewpoint of ourselves, of our children, and so that we're not so driven by one single one single thing that pushes us in the direction that it wants us to go. And so I think and that can happen in education again, like looking at anything that we study needs to be studied from multiple angles. Anything we learn needs to be learned from multiple angles. That's really the point I'm making. We can truly understand it. How we are just realizing in this moment in time with Black Lives Matter and things around BIPOC, how our entire education has been and often is literally at the mercy of who wrote the books, who drove all those things. And so that's not necessarily good education. That's bad education. Because it puts us in a framework, in a bubble, and we're kind of bursting out of that bubble now. And as I say this, I realize I'm totally off in a tangent. So I'll just pass the mic to whoever would like to pick it up from there.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. You have to have cross-cultural education in order to actually be educated. If you are not willing to dive into experiences that are not just your own, you will absolutely never actually know what's happening in the world outside of your own worldview. And not only is that bad education, that's just dangerous. From like a human standpoint, that is where conflict comes in, is when we can not understand any worldview than our own. I think one of the ways that, at least in America, we could really help deter that, but for whatever reason, we are just absolutely reluctant, is by teaching secondary and third languages from a very early age. We wait until high school, whenever the human brain can no longer actually really truly pick up a secondary language, to try and to try and teach them. And in reality, not only does learning a language enhance what you can do in life, how much pay you get, stuff like that, it also fundamentally psychologically changes the way you think. You are able to actually identify more with those other cultures because you can think within their language. And languages don't have exact translations like we think them to have. You really have to be able to understand that language in order to understand that culture. So if we can actually institute that from a very early age, it's going to benefit us both politically, as educated citizenry, and then also just in general. It benefits those kids. Not only does it also just like teach you that, it also expands your mind and will help you become more educated, more intelligent in other subjects as well. So that's definitely one thing that I very strongly advocate for, is we have to. I'm so sad that I don't speak any other languages than English. It's embarrassing, honestly. I live in Los Angeles. There are so many different languages spoken here, and I just feel embarrassed all the time to only be able to speak this one kind of bad language.
I've always been so envious of people who grow up with one parent, speaking one language, and other parents speaking another language, and they emerge and learn another one in school. And, like many Swiss citizens, emerge, or Scandinavian, speaking 3, 4 languages, English as well. I'm with you in just I think also learning from the languages very early, but it just creates a curiosity about the world around you. So I think I was having some feedback there. But yeah.
Yeah, and considering everything that we've been talking about today as well, I was wondering if you all could share maybe, a profound sort of moment of education as well. Like I remember them, some from high school, some from college, some from just generally, where maybe also an unconventional moment of education, because we're talking about sort of, outside of the bonds of traditional learning as well. Like, me reading a book and then thinking about the world in a different way, or even like, having this experience. Like, could you share maybe, one moment that really stands out as that sort of profound point or like star point of education as well.
I can start.
Yeah.
And Joel might have his own to add as well, but one thing that's really a gift with being able to travel with kids is kids don't have a lot of the inhibitions that adults have. So they're more willing to jump in to whatever you're doing, and they don't know any different, because if it's all they know, then that's all they know. And so no matter where we've traveled to, be it in Vietnam or Argentina, wherever we've gone, one thing that we've noticed is that kids seem to find each other, and the universal language of laughter has been so connecting and has been really a beautiful way to witness people experiencing each other, no matter the culture, no matter the situation, and connecting. And really, connection is what we need, and it's what kids will take from almost any experience they have and apply it to their life. Like, I know how to connect with this person even if I can't speak their language or I don't understand everything. And that's been really beautiful to witness. And I think we can learn from that too.
Yeah. We didn't capture this in the film, unfortunately, but there was this crazy moment where we were staying in a house, very small house, with an Argentinian family. And they had two girls that were our two girls' age, and their two girls didn't speak English, and our two girls didn't speak Spanish. And they were literally talking to each other in a blended language that was neither Spanish or English, and seemingly understanding what each other were saying, and playing for hours and hours and hours. And it's just like, the language of play is clearly beyond what we can even, well, Willa, you said it at the very beginning, and I think it was clear even in your trailer that play is so crucial. So that just makes your mind think, holy cow, like, education is next. This is a different level of what's happening. I think this is probably the case of a lot of different people too. If I'll just look at my own lens and why travel has been the thing that I've always tried to prioritize in my life, is that, and I'm sure, Elijah, you'll say the same, kind of to your first thought about the things that you're interested in. When I first left school and then spent a drop down in Thailand and was staring at Koh San Road, which is like this eclectic hodgepodge of, albeit very interesting characters from all over the world, the whole world shifted from black and white to Technicolor in one moment. And I realized that I had no idea the depths of what was still to be learned as my travels across this planet as a human being. And over the course of the months that followed in Thailand at the time, they would always sell these illegal reprinted copies of books, so you could just get like Hemingway and this and that, all just like reprinted on paper. And so I just read voraciously for months, and that was, in 2 months, I felt like I'd had a better education than in 10 years, because I was just in this free zone of digesting anything I wanted to digest, where my curiosity went. And so that shaped how we decided to look at raising our kids. So yeah, that's my thought of it.
Just when you were talking about just this really intense 2 months of just rich educational experience, just about the world, and literature and all of that, I went to, everything was very intense in high school. I was serious, academically. I played sports. I wanted to get into a good college. I did all the, National Honor Society, all the things that you're supposed to do to, be able to get into a good college. And I did. I got into my college of choice. And then I just felt really afraid. I just felt like I need to know that I know how to exist as a person outside of academia, outside of this structure. And so I made the decision to defer my enrollment for a year, and I worked for a few months, and then I went and lived in Italy for 7 months. And I studied some Italian in high school, but I learned a lot more pretty quickly upon arrival, and ended up studying college as well. But just that this idea of how much you can learn through just being yourself and being in the world and not necessarily having the structures and the stress and pressures that Elijah talks about. I just think it's so important and something that, as we go forward in designing, schooling and experiences for people during, formative years, we just really need to think about the importance of just learning how to exist in the world and being able to stand on your own 2 feet and process the world around you, and not just, very one-dimensional academic, reading of history books kind of way.
Yeah, I think that's very both of what you guys are saying is very similar to kind of my experience where after high school, I've actually never finished a higher education degree of any kind. I realized at a certain point while in college, like I can be educated outside of a classroom. And in fact, classrooms inhibit my education because what they're trying to do is just like get me to memorize a bunch of stuff and not actually have a full idea of what of the subject that we're learning. So I really did think like I would much rather than go do entertainment studies or something like that. I would rather take that kind of money and put it into films, short films, to educate myself through that. And actually making this film, What Kind of Day Has It Been, was the most educational experience of my life. It took so long to actually figure out like, okay, how am I going to raise this money? How am I going to get to set? And being able to do that really helped me just move forward and grow in, both my career path, but also how I see the world, how I see careers for different people. So really just, having that realization that while actual in-school education is phenomenal, I never ever discourage anyone to actually pursue it. Education occurs anywhere that you are if you are willing to let it. But if you're not, that's what becomes really problematic. So just like open your eyes, open your heart, open your ears, all those things, and let experiences pour into you rather than being very scared of them. Because human life is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Can I add to that? Both Willa, what you said, and Elijah is the I think one of the major cautionary aspects of education as it relates to kindergarten to grade 12. Again, totally agreeing that education is critical, learning is critical, is categorical identification of something that we have to become or become through that. One example, I am smart, I am not smart, is probably one of the biggest one. I am an athlete, I am not an athlete, I am this or that. It is, I don't necessarily, I think maybe it's a little accidentally intentional in the school system that happens, but it absolutely happens. And then as you grow up and you're just like, holy cow, there's a whole nother life. Who am I? Mm-hmm. And is that okay to be that thing? And the answer is often, no, it's not. Stay on track. To keep going down this path, young one. Like, yeah. Unfortunately, that creates further angst, and it doesn't allow us to comfortably explore all the aspects of who we are or what we can be in our life and in society. And again, like it always comes back to sounding like an educational bashing, and I hate that. That's not the intent, to bash the privilege that we have to be educated. But I know for myself, it sounds like you the same thing. Will like coming out of high school with a massive, I have to be this thing, but a part of me in my stomach doesn't want to be this thing, and I don't know what to do about it. And so I'm just going to party for a couple of years to see if that helps. But anyway, that's just to me, it's a really unfortunate causal effect of the way that it's structured, that we come out thinking there's an I am attached to something that we didn't intend it to be attached to. That takes a lifetime sometimes to undo.
You have to unlearn it.
Right? Yeah. So
yeah, well, this is sorry, we're kind of bumping up into the next panel, but this has been, thank you so much for the time, because this has been a great conversation. I think that you all come from it at like very interesting angles as well. So I think this has been sort of a very sort of well-rounded discussion of education and of all of this. And, thank you for submitting to the festival, and thank you for, being a panelist in participating and everything like that. There will be a panel right after this one. So if you want to stick around and sort of hang out and hear what everybody else has to say, you'll just not turn your camera or mic on, because then you'll bump into the presentation, but, feel free. But other than that, thank you so much for your time. So
thanks, Elijah. Thank you, Willa. Look forward to watching your film.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.